Where does the future of education lie? Kindly note the panel discussion floor would be open for a Q&A session later. Allow me to introduce the panelists to you. We have Ms. Seema Saini, the CEO of NL Dalmia Educational Society, which runs two schools of excellence, NL Dalmia Institute of Management Studies and Research and NL Dalmia High School. Mrs. Saini heads the K-12 ICSE school as the principal and brings with her extensive experience of 27 years in the field of education. She holds a B.Ed and master's degree in economics from Mumbai University and a master's in human resource development from Xavier University, US. Mrs. Saini has conducted organizational development intervention programs for various schools, including a CSR school, Balgram at Lonavala. Her education leadership promotes the success of all students while facilitating development, implementation and stewardship of a vision for learning, which resulted in Ms. Saini being appointed on the panel of inspectors for affiliating schools to Council for the Indian School Certificate Examinations for ICSE and ISC. She has been conferred with several awards such as the Best Education Award for Talented Personalities, Ideal Principal Award by Students Development Society, Pune, and Motivating Principal Award by Junior Red Cross Society, to name a few. We welcome you, ma'am. Can we have a round of applause, please? Our next panelist is Shri D Shashikumar, the General Secretary of Associated Managements of Private Schools in Karnataka. Welcome, sir. Can we welcome him with a round of applause, please? Our next panelist is Ms. Hamsa Venugopal, the Managing Director and Trustee of New Baldwin Group of Institutions. Ms. Hamsa is an MBA graduate from the University of Cambridge, London. She is a go-getter who is result-driven, self-motivated and resourceful. She has held the leadership role for over 10 years. She's a research analyst on content development for kindergarten and primary years and has been a spokesperson for national and international education interaction, both on media and off media. Ms. Hamsa K. Venugopal is the recipient of the Youngest Entrepreneur of the Year Award for International Women Educationalist by the Academy of Universal Global Peace, US. Welcome, ma'am. We then have Dr. Mrs. B. Gayethri Devi, the principal of Little Flower Public School, Bangalore. Mrs. Gayethri Devi has over 25 years of academic and administrative experience in India and abroad with reputed schools, colleges, and universities. She has worked in prestigious institutions like ABBAC Huishav Chalamprakrit University at Bangkok, and has also worked as an inspector for the Ministry of Education in the Sultanate of Oman. She's the convener for ICSE examinations in Bangalore South, the inspector of CISE schools, and the secretary-treasurer for the Karnataka Association of ICSE schools. Welcome, ma'am. Over to Ms. Seema Saini.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here on this panel with Education Today, and wonderful panelists that we have with us with their immense experience and their presence in the field of education and the amount of work that they have done in the field of education. I think a very apt panel for the topic that has been chosen for this afternoon, closure of budget private schools and where does the future of education lie. I think it is important to just reflect on the thought that since 2011 to 15, the UDICE numbers, the unique identification numbers of students, indicated high amount of enrollments in private schools, private unaided as well as aided schools. Only, in fact, the enrollments in government schools were getting lower and lower, with just 9% of enrollment happening there, whereas the private schools had approximately an increase of 36%. And it was noticed over the years that the private schools, especially the budget private schools, were doing a great job, especially considering that it was a very community school, closer to the community where people lived, and affordable fee structure. So it sort of boosted the education levels and filled in the vacuum which the government was not able to fill in. A large chunk of population were being given quality education, or education where teachers were regular, where absenteeism was not there, and students could bring in some level of achievement. After the pandemic, things have changed. Things have changed tremendously. And this is where I would like two bit from each one of you on where do you think the pandemic, how do you think the pandemic has affected the private schools, or what is the impact on these budget private schools? I know Shri Shashidharan has done a lot of work Mr. Shashikumar has done a lot of work in the field of, these budget schools, especially for the cause of teachers. So I think we could begin from you and then go on.
Thank you. Good evening, all. When we speak about budget school, in other way schools, we are talking about the country's 15 lakh schools.
Correct.
Out of that, CBSE, ICSE, IB, all put together is around 26,000 plus. Even in this 26,000 plus across India, there are more than 15,000 schools falling within budget definition.
Absolutely.
What do you mean by budget schools? The cost per child expenditure which is spent from government to provide education in their public school, and the cost when it comes to private unaided school, there we define budget school. And when we think of it, it is more than 14 plus lakh schools across India we are talking about, which charges between 10,000 to 40,000 or max to max 50,000. The biggest pathetic situation is, like during pandemic, most of these budget schools were put in trouble. The first foremost important is no payment of fees. Most of the government played a big, massive role in disturbing the functionality of schools, saying that, for example, when we talk about Karnataka beautiful, our education minister started saying, don't pay fees for schools. When all things were running during the pandemic, during the closure, but schools' fees were stopped intentionally so that it started getting advantage from the parents' community, those who are affordable, those who were in government employ, wherein they got full salary, IT sector, full salary, public limited companies, full salary, but those parents did not turn back to schools to provide that minimum fees, made lakhs of teachers jobless, lakhs of infrastructure, loans, principal amount. Totally today it is pathetic. Financial difficulties are huge. Schools started closing down themselves, especially pre-primary sector. 90% of the pre-primary schools are shut. Their furniture were being put in yards, put in gardens. This is the biggest disaster, and simultaneously there was no continued learning. So all put together, this was a handy, very, very unfortunate decisions from officials. Then started withdrawing TCs from the private unaided school, transferring them to other schools or to the government schools, wherein lakhs of students migrated, lakhs of students left the school. Even today, when I speak about Karnataka alone, it might be across the country, more than 60% of the students are not paid minimum fees. Out of that, primary, when we talk about pre-primary, more than 80% in budget schools have not got admitted. More than 40 to 50% have not got admitted in primary, that is from 1 to 5th. Only beautiful admissions have happened 8th, 9th, 10th sector. This is the ground reality, but still government doesn't want to do anything, leaving all on the private unaided school, so that if they want to close down. But their regulation is intact. They want affiliations, renewal of recognitions. But even during pandemic, they came out with fire safety, PWD, and child safety, cyber safety, all safety norms, wherein each budget school were supposed to shell out not lesser than 5 lakhs to 50 lakhs in the name of child safety. Today, there is a huge crowd sitting in front of me across the country, but we never knew what is there for us in the name of child safety and security. MHRD has now come out with prosecution, penalization. I don't know how many of you in this house knew this. Your total revenue, if your school happens to meet with some sort of incident with child abuse or whatever it is, you are being liable prosecution. Along with that, first time 1% of your total revenue, second time 3%, third time 5% of your total revenue as just a penalty. And the country's community who are giving the kind education has left nowhere, and their place has been very difficult, very pathetic. This is what the budget school and all schools across are facing as on now in the pandemic.
Very true, very rightly put in. 80% of our private schools basically are budget schools. And budget whether
95% plus are budget school. Out of that, 60% are dependence on monthly fees collection. That is, there are very much big statistics. Hopefully, this
each
is not
state
the
has a little variance.
yeah,
Probably,
but more or less similar.
Yes, yes. So with that kind of a scenario and what you just mentioned, the kind of 8th, 9th and 10th very correctly put forward, that they are those sections where school is running smoothly because affiliation is what they want, and students also look for giving exams, and parents suddenly realize the importance of completing one milestone of that child's life through a school and become active where school is concerned. But considering the current scenario and what we just heard, it seems like future of education is very bleak. And this is looking at in what ways do you think these low-cost private schools could help improve learning? Do you think with these budget schools, and Hamsa ma'am, if you could throw some light on this?
Yeah, a very good afternoon to the gathering of knowledge here. We got a beautiful statistic from Asheka sir, and Seema ma'am briefed the topic, the budget private school. Before I start to say about the learning cycle of the budget private school, how is it going to be effective? I just wanted to ask one thing. Throughout, I mean, many schools are seated here throughout India, right? Is there any one school which has not faced problem during this pandemic? Anyone? Yes. So the problem of pandemic hit the entire schooling sector, be it the elite schools or be it the budgeted schools, right? So yeah, and what range did it hit and what is the financial literacy each school had? That's a different take. But now my question is, you're asking about the learning cycle. What's the future of the learning cycle of the budgeted school? So let me just take the difference words in the sentence, learning and the budgeted school. Now we have budgeted school, as sir rightly said, more than 85% of India has a budgeted school, and learning. So do the learning fit into elite school or budgeted school? So when you're talking about learning cycle of a child, I believe, yes, there are fancy luxury educational products today. There are beautiful pedagogy, edible, the technology available, which will spike up the learning curve. Definitely during this pandemic, we saw what happened with the different, our WhatsApp became the learning tool for us. So yes, definitely there are certain tools which spiked up the learning cycle of the child. But this is completely my take. I don't know how many educators are with me. I don't believe that learning cycle completely depends on the budget. Because I have seen a school in Haryana, when I walked in, the maths teacher was teaching additional and subtraction with the use of a pebble which is available in the ground. And the learning outcome was quite huge. When I walked into the school in Anekal, I saw this teacher took the students outside and measuring the tree with the shadow of it. So that was mind-blowing. That is an effectiveness which brings into learning cycle. I belong to that educator who believe that it's not only technology or not only the products available, with all due respect for the exhibition, what is happening outside. I don't believe that that is the only tool which will lead for the effective learning cycle today. I believe that the effective curriculum, the effective pedagogy in the classroom, the effective, innovative pedagogy, what is framed in the school, be it budgeted school or be it the elite school, that brings in a spike in the learning cycle of the child. I rest by saying that pandemic has been a great guru for us. It's been a greatest guru for the educational industry as such throughout the globe. Let's learn from it. We are humans, we are adaptable, we are creative, we know what to, we are very, very adaptable. Let's be prepared for how many other waves that comes, and let's make sure that education and the learning cycle of the child will be very effective, no doubt what comes the way. Thank you.
So the silver lining is there, and very positive note I think you brought in this discussion. When we see pay cuts, when we see low collection of fees, lack of technological development, all of this happening in budget school, it does seem that what's going to be the future of learning? How is learning going to take place in these budget schools? But very rightly put across that effective learning or teaching learning processes need not be dependent only on the fancy frills that are all around. Of course, all that aid the level of teaching learning process, but without that also initiatives that can be taken by bringing in innovations will definitely improve learning. So that was on a very positive note that I think the budget schools have some ray of hope attached to it to improve and bring in positive outcome for children. But now, Ma'am Gayethri, Ma'am, to you, I'd like to ask this question, that government and public schools are government schools basically, or public schools are the bastion of budget schools. Do you see a rise of private budget schools continuing, or private budget schools coming back into the foray, like after 2020 with the pandemic? We heard of many schools being up there for sale, were not able to manage schools because of the huge, they couldn't afford the monthly outflow of the salary bill, the wage bill itself was very high, and the fees was not coming in. So all of that sort of, everything went topsy-turvy for those small schools. And how do you think, with this kind of a scenario, do you think budget schools, private schools would survive?
Yeah. So, a very good afternoon to everybody present here. Pandemic has taught us many lessons as educators for which none of us were ready or prepared for. Being in this line and also being the head of associations, Mr. Shashi and myself constantly get calls from various educational houses, especially from the budget school lining, mentioning that their schools are put for sale. If something could be done in this regard, could they get some potential buyers? So it really saddens us, because I'm sure any one of us who would want to open a school would be like, it's like our baby, and there's so much of passion, there's so much of involvement, and there's so much of research that goes into building up one's own school. And when budget schools come up, I'm sure their intention is to provide quality education to the community around them, to the society around them. And usually, if we look into the geographical locations of where these budget schools are located, you will see middle-class families, lower middle-class families residing in and around the budget schools. Pandemic has also ensured that many of these parents lose their jobs. They have no day-to-day income coming in because their livelihood has been struck by the pandemic, and hence the fees wasn't pouring in. So when the fee is not pouring in, like Mr. Shashikumar mentioned, there are many budget schools which survive on the monthly fee that pours in. These are not schools which collect the fee in biannually or annually. It is monthly that they collect the fee, and when they don't get the monthly fee income, executing the day-to-day chores of the school, paying the salaries, maintenance of the buildings, the support staff, becomes a Herculean task. And most of the managements who have opened these budget schools have borrowed money from various sectors of the society. So when there's no inflow of fee, then not only managing the day-to-day affairs of the schools becomes difficult, but their loans that they have taken, they were not able to pay back the loans, the interest were mounting, and thus they landed up in a situation that, is very unpleasant for all of us as educators to understand, and just trying to be in their shoes and trying to understand what they are going through definitely brings chills into us.
Very true. Especially it's the children end of the day who are at the who get affected, who bear the brunt of this whole process. So, how do you think, given the scenario that it is, whether financial institutions you think could be brought in for it, there could be pulled in into the system to help schools? Of course, they put up the schools for sale, and the richer schools, if I may say so, or the elite schools do adopt or take over these schools and try to bring in quality education, which will ultimately help the children. Maybe we need to open our minds to that. And what are the ways you think you could, policymakers could take a leaf out of yours? Some suggestion from you, Mr. Shashikumar. How do you think this problem could be met? The aftermath of the pandemic on budget schools could.
It's an important aspects because as a responsible government, either the government of India or the government of any appropriate state, first they should have seen this sector as a very, very important one. Because believe it, it is so unfortunate, we are all in this house and we are all educators. There was even for a liquor shop, a wine shop, the government gave subsidy for their building tax, wagera wagera. For a tourist department, they gave a subsidy. But when it came to the country's most important institution, that is education, they never even provided single NP as a relief. Out of 20 lakh crores, not even, we requested the government, at least each state to be allocated with 1,000 crores so that the needy of that budget schools could sustain by opting some amount of loan, because we were closed in for more than 500 days. That is almost 1.5 years. And out of this, most budget schools were not even collected even a few lakh rupees so that they can sustain with minimum payment for their staff, for teachers. Non-teaching staff was completely deprived. We came on road, 45,000 teachers, institution managements, non-teaching staff. We came on road. We protested. It was the highest volumed protest during pandemic. But the country government, the state governments couldn't open their eyes and allocate some favors. Finally, we could get 5,000 rupees for my teachers as a token of gratitude during the pandemic. Even there, out of 105 crores, till now, 37 crores is in the account of education department where that could not be transferred to my teachers. That means there is no will. The political will is failure in this country. All these people are because of you people. They learned. They are best learned people, but they didn't show that Guru Vandana or Guru Dakshina at least in this pandemic. And this is where we are, really it is a sad moment. Now the country has to relook into these aspects. There should be a financial support too, because we are not talking about 1,000, 10,000 lakhs schools. We are talking about 15 out of 14 lakhs institutions, which are primary and secondary education I'm talking about. We are catering about almost 400, once NEP is in force, we are supposed to provide out of 200 plus crores students. and it is the primary responsibility of the government which we are taking on our shoulder. But our fraternity, PF, ESI, professional tax, not even, believe it, in Bangalore, the fundamental right of an education institution to have its property tax waived off. But unfortunately, during COVID, the property tax which was exempted was made 100% to pay in COVID. Can you believe it? For property, you are charging 0.5% of your total asset. For example, if your institution is having 25 crores of worth building, you are supposed to pay 0.5%, then we disputed and now it is 0.5% just for inspection fees from PWD, wherein down the lane you never get that certificate. This is the situation. The sector has to be looked. There should be relaxation. There should be consideration. There should be allocation of fund for support. Then only you can take it forward where the responsibility of the government is.
Very true. The cause, the entire responsibility lies on the shoulders of the government, which they're probably missing the whole purpose of education. The whole purpose of education is not seen by them. At times, that is the sad thought that comes to our mind. In fact, our private schools are 40 times more effective. I'm talking of budget schools in this case. They're 40 times more cost effective in bringing in 1 unit of achievement. Meaning the government schools, even if they spend the money, it doesn't reflect as achievement for students. Where does the money go? How is it being put to use? It's very sad to see that. And what Mr. Shashikumar just said, that 37,000 crore rupees are lying in the coffers of the government without being utilized for the cause of education. That's a very, very sad state of affairs. If they're converting it into just a 5,000 rupees ex gratia for teachers maybe. But what is sad is that what is happening to education then? If you look at the larger picture, the best of education in India, or Indian brain as it's talked about the world over, who's contributing to that? It is the private schools in a way which is contributing to that. And despite that, the government has not taken heed of the plight of these budget private schools, even during the pandemic, is a sad part. I think this is where we educators can put in our bit and add in some value, at least indicate that to the government that these small schools or budget schools who cater to a smaller population of school or smaller strength of school with a smaller fee structure can also effectively manage and run schools. And if, somehow we promote startup of these budget private schools, startups are there, unicorns are there everywhere, in every segment, in every domain. Why not bring in these startups in budget private schools and encourage these smaller schools? Gayethri ma'am, I would like to end it with your take on this thought. How do you think can we private schools come together or do something or initiate this kind of an environment where startup schools for budget private schools would come in?
Education is for the society and the children of the society. Anybody who is interested in imparting education to the society can come in. It could be a startup company, it could be a unicorn, but the interest that is shared should be common. There should be no vested interest when a unicorn comes in or when there is another domain coming into it. So the bottom line, the 1-point agenda should be in the interest of the society and to impart, genuinely impart quality education to these children. So if these 2 points are met by any XYZ of the society, they should stand up to support. Like for example, the Azim Premji Foundation. The enormous amount of funds that the Azim Premji Foundation donates for the cause of education. It could be Infosys, it could be so many other private sectors that are there. It is not about the money that is being pooling in. Like Mr. Shashi said, XYZ amount is in the corpus. So every single penny that has been donated should be utilized to the cause, and there should be genuine people involved to ensure that every single penny is, to the penny is utilized to its optimum. Only then will we be able to see success in this regard.
Very true. Any passing comments, Ms.
Um,
Hamsa?
Absolutely, I agree with Gayethri Devi ma'am, and wonderful, actually we got a wonderful points here. I would just want to say, if we don't take up a stand on aiding the budget private school, we in India, we have more than 70% of the population are budgeted family, right? So what happened during this war? We saw Ukraine had 16,000 MBBS students, and why so? Because MBBS became an expensive affair in India. Let's pray and hope that doesn't have to happen to the schooling sector. If we don't aid our budgeted private schools, we are going to face that. Yeah, so on that take, I would like to rest.
Yeah. Your parting thoughts were wonderful. Absolutely. Where is education going? And all of us are responsible for it. We cannot be pushing the, responsibility on either the government or the corporate also. Each one of us here as an educator has to put in their 2 bit to ensure that quality education can come across, and whatever we can do in this field for children would be definitely much appreciated for the future of the country. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
That was an extremely interesting panel discussion. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Please stay on stage. I request Mr. Anil Sharma to felicitate the panelists, please. Have a round of applause, please.